Well, thank you, Chris, and I appreciate that introduction. And thank you for everybody who's watching, because I know we're the last presentation of the night. So thank you again. My presentation is two-part. I'm going to talk about how scouting reports can give you an advantage, and that advantage can lead to wins. And the other part I'm going to talk about is using the theory of defending actions as part of stopping teams in your half-court defense. And then try to combine the two of them together, because I think the two of them together is a winning combination. My break in coaching was created by my high school coach, who taught me how to watch and learn, and taught me there was an advantage and strength in seeing things, because you'd be further ahead than everybody else. This high school coach, Pat Papalia, is still a dear friend and a mentor. So I used scouting as a high school coach, and was a big part of everything I did at university. Share a story with you. In 1991, my high school team was fortunate enough, and I had a great team, that we won an officer championship. So I was very fortunate to coach a very good team. But along the way, we had some big games that I think we won because of scouting reports. We played at a Christmas tournament in Birmingham, Alabama, and there were 8 teams there, and everybody was undefeated. We played St. Raymond's out of New York, out of the Bronx, and they were undefeated at the time, and we had 9 kids who didn't make the ice hockey team in Canada. So we go down there, and I was very fortunate because Coach Lou Carnesecca of St. John's, I met him at a conference, at a clinic, and he was telling me that, listen, you need anything, just call me. So I'm thinking, maybe I can start with Coach Carnesecca and ask him, how do I get a scouting report on St. Raymond's? Well, Coach Carnesecca is great, like all coaches are, and he helps me out, gets me to his assistant coach, Brian Mahoney, who eventually became the head coach, who hooked me up with a coach in their conference, in a high school conference in New York City. Well, we go down to Birmingham, and St. Raymond's was the #1 draw down there in their tournament. And we played in the first game. They know nothing about us, but we've got a real good indication of them. And we end up screwing up the tournament because we knocked them off in the first game. And I knew right then and there that we prepared to win that game. And I always felt like you've got to be prepared. We go on and we win an officer championship here in Ontario. And along the way, we played some great teams. And I think we were the one team that probably used video scouting reports before other teams did back then. And then our season ended in a great tournament in Maryland, in Alhambra. And we opened up that tournament against Philadelphia Roman Catholic, ranked #4 back then in the USA Today, which was a big deal. And we go down there and we lose to them in overtime. We had a tremendous scouting report of them. So I learned that in high school, and I brought that to the university. And I think I got better at it and learned more and talked to more people. My biggest fear in coaching any team is, if my team not ready. Did I not teach them something that I should have? It's one of my biggest fears. When it comes to preparation, I've always kind of treated basketball more like a football coach. I want to stop my opponent, the team we're playing against, every possession. I want to slow the game up. I want to stop and control the defensive possessions. And video, my high school coach taught me that video was a great teaching tool. And the thing with video is you got to teach players how to watch video to learn rather than to watch video to be entertained. So my goal right now is to come through this and give you an idea of what we do. And I'll just share this a little bit with my personal teaching philosophies.
Let me just, there you go. Yep, you're good.
Okay, so a couple of things that are really important to me. One is offense's concepts, defense's rules. And I think the defensive rule part is easy because rules, you teach the rules, and there's not a lot, they're rules. But the concept, that's a difficult one. And so in concepts, I always believe that it goes back to my teaching background, whole part whole. It's like a math teacher. You show the question, you put it up on the board, you show them the whole. And nobody understands what's going on. But then you break it down in all these parts. And better your students, bigger the parts. Weaker your students, smaller the parts. And so you take all those parts again. Then when you come back to the whole, everybody seems to understand it. It's the most efficient way that I found to teach concepts along the way. The next thing that I thought was really important was in teaching rules, if I teach why and get my team to agree with the why, then they may have question marks, but they're going to know why we're doing it. and they won't forget the rule. So I always felt that was important rather than just give them the rule. And no matter your overall beliefs on teaching, on your teaching, no matter how you decide you're going to teach it, are you going to, pack line, are you going to force weak hand? No matter what you do, your blocks must fit. Your foundation is everything, but the blocks must fit, and everything must work perfectly, and there can't be contradictions because that'll kill you. And then talking. I'm a huge fan, a huge advocate of talking on the basketball court. It screams confidence. It's intimidating to other teams. You tell a player their weakness, that's fine. But only people that talk are people that know what's going on. You take a bunch of students in a classroom and they're talking all day long. You get them on the basketball court and they don't talk. And every coach out here, I think one of the things we can do is improve how we talk on the court. But talking's got a place. Talking from the bench on offense, to me, causes confusion. As a coach, I try to rarely ever do I talk on offense except calling a play, because I think it leads to second guessing. Talking on the bench, from the bench on defense, enhances your performance. You can help, because it's rules, you can help your team out. You can help them out by telling them, watch it, going left, jump to help. You can do things, and guys on your team have to be good at it. So the first part that I'm going to talk a little bit about is about how to teach when using a scouting report. You have to understand the scouting report is the first introduction your team has to the opponent. And the scouting report is going to work on two ends. It's going to spend most of its time on offense, but it's also going to talk about defensive tendencies. And in that scouting report, you're going to talk about sets and offensive actions. You're going to talk about individuals. You're going to talk about players. And a lot of that information is going to be based on analytics, stats, video, because you're not only going to talk about players, you're going to hopefully show them video about players. And then you're going to talk about how players have certain ability to work together. In a ball screen situation, do we have a pick and pop? This is a real good pick and pop combination. So we're going to talk a little bit about not just individuals, but individuals working together. So scouting reports, to me, is like teaching to the ends. And you're teaching something that is there, and here it is. It's a combo of both rules and concepts. But it's teaching to the ends. I like to refer to it sometimes as you're teaching to an exam. So I'm going to teach you what's on the exam. Instead of teaching you just everything, I'm going to emphasize what's on the exam. I'm going to try to teach you everything as we go on during the season. But for that game, I'm going to try to teach to the exam. Some players like to refer to it as a cheat sheet. Some people just look at it as great quality study notes. So building your scouting report, this is where I've become much better at later in my career when I did a lot more scouting and now doing a lot of advanced scouting in the NBA. It starts with a rolling call sheet. And the rolling call sheet are play calls that go out throughout the game. And I'll show you a better description of it as we get down a little bit. But these are live reports. You're watching the team play. You're trying to get verbals and visuals that you can't get just based on watching teams on film. You then take that and you combine the film now to the calls and the organization of the plays. And we'll talk about drawing all that up and getting that ready. You then put this incredible, detailed, in-depth report together. And this is what I refer to as a micro report. You're putting as much information in there as you can. Now, somebody on your team is going to present the opponent. A lot of pro teams, it's an assistant coach. It's somebody on your coaching staff. On other teams, it's the head coach themselves. So they're doing this. So maybe the scouting report is being prepared by an assistant given to the head coach. They get all the information, and you can never give the head coach too much information or whoever the coach is working on it. So then that coach puts together a macro report, and the macro report has less detail. And that coach has to put it together in 3 different forms. It's got to be a written report, and a lot of it will be diagrams and descriptions of the plays and the calls. It's got to be a video report because now players can see it and see the action happening. And then you need a physical report, a walkthrough, visual, but more physical. Because players on our team learn 3 different ways. You may have one player on your team that just can't pick up can't pick it up on the written report, can't pick it up on the video report. But once you walk through, I feel a lot more comfortable. Now you're going to get some great players who are really good at scouting reports that can pick it up on the radio, on the written, the video, all three of them. And this is really important because this is teaching. This is teaching. I've got to teach all three ways because I've got to make sure that you know what we're wanting to do. And then finally, the pregame review is something that we do prior to the game. And all that is just a quick going over some of the stuff that we talked about and just a quick reminder. Not in depth by any means, but just a quick reminder. So let me tell you a little bit about rolling call sheets. This is the first part. This is a log of a game or a number of games. In the NBA, most teams work 4 games out. This is a live exercise when possible because the two things you can get out of a rolling call sheet are verbal calls and visual calls. And you want to be able to get that because you can't get that on film. And most NBA scouts are at games not just to get stuff, because they get a lot of stuff off film. You want to be able to get the verbals and the visuals. And this comes from a pile of different places. You can get the verbal and the visuals from the head coach who's calling the play, the point guard on it, somebody who's repeating to somebody else. You can get that from different sources on the court. You can always get more verbal and visual calls in person than on film. And it's a blueprint to your scout. So here's my rolling call sheet. Here's what I would work with. On the left here, it's just a written. I would write everything down because because I'm doing other notes as I'm doing this. And you put down the time, you put down the call. Now, on the major sheet here, you'll see my calls, and you'll see certain things that are bolded, and there's time on it. And that's the time that I can relate now to the film of the video. So as we go through the calls, if I'm saying, okay, elbow, and I'll say visual, well, then I'm letting the person know that they touched their elbow. But as you go through some of this stuff, you'll see how many times slide out of bounds, ATOs after timeouts, AFTs after free throws. And so you get this and you build it up, and you will match all these calls to video. You will then produce the video play of all these calls. If you've done this for 4 games leading up to your opponent, which what they would do in the NBA, you're going to then chart the calls at the end. And at the bottom, you'll see, the calls that were made the most time. And so if you do this over a 4-game period, you'll highlight, say, okay, rub 5 is one of the favorite calls. So maybe when I present it to the players, I'm going to definitely present rub 5. And you'll go and then you'll look at the last 4 games and you'll find, in the last 2 games, they ran slice 5. So now they must like it. So you take all that information, you add it up, you tally it, and you do this for, in some cases, 4 games, 1 game, 2 games. It's going to help you give you an idea of who your opponent is and what they're going to do.
Coach, how many would you present to your team? Like that you chart, how many would you give to them to really key in on?
I would, if I could chart, if I'm a university coach and I could chart the last 2 games or the last 3 games, I'm pretty happy. If I'm a high school coach, if I can get more than 1 game, I'm really happy. Okay. It just gives you an idea. Now, as you get further up the ladder in quality of play, your guys are going to handle a lot more, and there's a lot more people to help you out do stuff.
Right.
But the key part then is you got to match the video to those calls.
Right.
And I've used Fast Draw, and I know there's other options out there, but this is where you draw the plays. So in this chart here, you can look at, this was me setting up our play calls against Dominican in 2017. And as you can notice, there's a pile of information here. We're talking about a 17-page report. And this was stuff that I probably watched after 4 games. Now, this information is going to go on to the assistant coach who's in charge of putting the scouting report together. So in the Fast Draw, for those who use it and those who haven't, You're going to have descriptions on here. Now, some coaches in the player report may show a couple clips or have that on the player report, cut it out and put it on there. But if not, that assistant coach who gets all this information, he's the specialist. He's the guy that the head coach will lean on to say, okay, what's four horns? What are they going to do? And not only that, players are going to lean on that assistant coach because he's now the expert. On the bench, he is the expert of that team. So as you can see, this would have been a 17-page report. You take this detailed written report now of the play calls, the rolling call sheet, the drawn up plays, but then you also have to write up a report of some of the things that they did. Now you've got player personnel that you're doing through the analytics already, but now you've got to add more stuff to it. So as you're watching the games or after games, you're going to put some stuff in detail for this coach putting the scouting report together. And this tends to be a little bit more in depth. So example here, sometimes in tournaments, when you're coaching with the national team, you're doing international tournaments, you don't get to spend a whole lot of days because you might get one day to prep. And so what you want to do is you want to be able to put some information together. So this is the information through my eyes. This is stuff that I think are strengths and weaknesses of our opponent. Trying to give them a starting lineup, the coach will get it. Trying to, help out a little bit, telling them what, shooters, free throw shooters are, because that coach has to know that team on the bench. Because if they get in a situation late in the game, who do we foul, or who's a big shooter on the court, they've got that and they're the experts. Offensive sets, transition, pick and roll. Every scouting report will have everything about pick and roll, every type of pick and roll teams do, and how they defend pick and rolls. So we talk about post action. So there's no perfect form on how to do this. You do it the way either the coach likes it done or the way the assistant coach who you're sending this information to likes it done. So how you decide to do it is up to you. As I go through this now, I've talked about the offensive ends, out of bounds, end outs, end of game situations. We've got some information. If it's going to be a tight game, what do they like to do at least? And then now you go to your defensive tendencies. And you talk about their transition, their pick and roll. How do they handle? How do they handle coverages? How do they handle isolations? Do they play zone? All this information now goes with the package that you've already created. And that goes to the assistant coach. Now you got player information. And player information comes from different ways and it's presented differently. In some coaches, some people who want the scout written up want it in a chart format. They want it very analytically. They want numbers. They want pictures. They want everything. Some coaches, like in this case here, there's certain factors, certain things that they want in. They want certain stats, and they like right hand. So we're talking about forcing weak hand. That's really important. When are we coming up on the ball late? Is the person, is he a good shooter? Max range, all that information. But the big one on this one here that I think is really unique is, questionable passer off the dribble. How good? Why are we forcing left? Because he's a questionable passer off the dribble. And players get this information in their profiles. So now, all this stuff comes in. It is a volume of information. It's up to the coach who's doing the scout to the team to put this in a report. And in putting this in the report, you've got to try to keep that report plain and simple. 2 pages would be great. Sometimes we end up going to 3, especially if you're going to show some plays and stuff like that. But the report starts off with report on the players. So that was the sheet that they have. So report for the players, 1 to 3 pages. It's based on your game plan. So now if you're eligible or you're in a situation where you can have a pregame shoot, this is the perfect time to do it. If you don't, it's the practice before the game where you do it. So you give your players some information to work with. And then you talk about keys, main points of emphasis in all aspects of the games. This goes in here. What are we going to do? What are we trying to do? And this will be accompanied by the video. So when you show your players this, you're also going to show them a video of the calls and the plays they like to go to. And you might show, in this case here, loop into mid pick and roll, bayou, You're going to show the plays that you felt are the most important. You're not going to show them everything. And then you're going to walk through it. And if in certain cases, certain things that they're going to do that you want to be able, you're prepared. Then on the defensive game plan, you've got to do the same thing. So pick and roll defense. You've got to talk about how you're going to handle it. Are we going to blitz in a certain situation? Are we going to handle certain players a little bit differently? And so you build up your format. Now your team is prepared. If they get this 24 hours before the game, 12 hours before the game, whatever they can do. Now I get back to saying some players will take this in incredibly well, especially if you do this every game. But there's always going to be some players who just have a heart that's just too much information for them. So they're going to rely on maybe the video or the walkthrough. So I went through that very quickly, but that's the development of a scouting plan. And I think if you are prepared and you have a scout, and how you do it, it could depend on who you're coaching and how much time you have. But any form of active scouting report that does all those things, rolling call sheets, sit down and watch people play, is going to be beneficial to you, and it's going to help your team tremendously. It's always going to help. So I think that part is important, that you give your team an advantage. And if you can, you create it, but it's got to fit your team, and it's got to be able, they've got to be able to understand it. The other thing,
Coach, in a quick tournament like that, what did you find was most effective? Was it the personnel scout or what they were running for the teams? Because those tournaments that you only see them a couple times, what was most useful for the teams?
Well, I'm going to say in most cases it was a combination of both.
Okay.
Like players love when and we talk about who here defending action, when they see a sign, somebody goes, a stack, and all of a sudden a coach from the bench says, watch the back screen. So they're yelling the action. You're yelling your terminology to it. So I think players like to have a little bit of information so that they don't get caught in a blind situation. So I think a little bit of both, but I'll give you a great example of this. You're coaching a rep team, and you got a game in 4 hours. And I watch rep team coaches and teams play, and I'm thinking, man, what a great opportunity this would be after your game, instead of getting up, getting your stuff, and running out to grab some fast food, sitting in the stands with your team and narrating what you see to them. So right then and there, live, you're watching your next opponent and through the coach's eyes. And to me, that might be as good a scouting report for young players as anything you can have. They're now watching, like we take for granted that they're actually watching, and they're not. But if they sat with you and watched the first half or the first quarter of the next game, and you as the coach went through it and started explaining what you see, that to me is a scouting report.
Perfect. Yeah, that makes sense. See it through your eyes, right?
Yeah. So then now they understand where we're coming from. And the fact is, we've got to be together on this. So now we go to the next part. And I said, just a scouting report on its own will help you be successful. The next part is defending actions. And this is something that I really believe in. I think when you can get into the half court and force a team into half court basketball, and you've taught, and again, because defense is rules, and you've taught all the actions that you're going to defend against, and you're going to handle it the same way all the time, you have a huge advantage. So defending actions, this is your defensive inventory. These are the actions that you'll defend as a team. Higher the level of competition, more actions you're going to see. But as you go through some of these, you're going to find that, teams in your conference or teams that you're going to play, they're running specific types of offense. So help your team out and teach to what they're running. But your actions have to complement and never contradict your team defense. So let's say I am a pack line defensive team. That is my philosophy. This is what we are. This is how we're handling it. That's great. You can handle all the actions within your rules, but you still have to stay a pack line team. If you are a force weak hand team, great. That's your defensive philosophy overall, but you have to handle the actions in your system. Back in the early 2000s, late 90s, I used to defend, one of the big things that we did was we believed that we played what we called the box. Our big goal was not to allow reversal. Push the ball on the side, keep it on the side, and as the ball got closer to the baseline, the box got smaller. And what we found was, and the reason I really fell in love with it back then was everybody was using offenses that had reversals. And we found a way real easy to take away the reversal. And if we took away the reversal, we took teams out of their actions. And as basketball progressed a little bit, you got back to the pick and roll. So I may not use that as much today, but back then it was very effective for us. So now here's the hard part. You've got these actions, these defensive actions on how you're going to defend it. The key part here is the first thing you have to do is your terminology has to be consistent. It has to stay the same. Other teams will call it something else. That's fine. But you on defense always have to relate it to your terminology. So you have to teach terminology. You have to teach how to defend the action. And again, no room for innovation here. Here's how we defend the action because everybody's counting on you to do it properly. This takes incredible amount of practice. The last one, number 3, this is the most difficult one. Through repetition, through constant communication, we have to teach how to identify the action. So if I call back screen, and that's just a simple action, I know how we're going to handle every back screen situation. So eventually when we start getting to an action like a Spain that includes a back screen off of a ball screen, that back screen action that we're talking about, we've identified that as a back screen. So something like that becomes a combination play. Really tough. This is like teaching terminology is easy. Teach to defend the action is super important. You can do that. Teaching how to identify the action, this is where you must demand communication from your players. And that's like, you know who knows it. So common actions. And I just threw a bunch down here, things that I had in my final season when I was coaching some pro ball. And a lot of it became ball screen. So 2-side, 3-side ball screen, elbow, mid ball screen, step up, transitions, double drag, short action, Spain action, which is a ball screen into a back screen. You know, Coach Oliver loves his Ricky. And so I kept that terminology myself where that's a screen, a mid ball screen into a rescreen. Double screens. How do you handle double screens? You know, somebody coming through the middle. You have to be consistent. Cross screen, a rip screen, a flex screen, floppies, floppy action, pin down, down screens, back screen, stagger. My inventory here is much greater than maybe if I'm coaching a 12 and under team, if I'm coaching a high school team. It's as you get further up, you're going to, throughout the season, you're going to see these actions. So this is your inventory on what you see maybe in your conference or what you're going to see in tournament play or things that you have to work on as a coach. These are things that you have to teach. You must create your own inventory of teaching and saying, okay, these are things that I saw last year that we played against, so I got to make sure I teach it. Again, this goes back to that fear I had of going into a game and somebody runs an action that I didn't teach. I feel naked. I feel like I left my team down. And so this has been really important to me. And if I teach you something that we don't see all year, then I know if we do see it, even after a timeout play, you'll have some recognition of it. Because scouting plays happen, and okay, I know they run certain actions, but after timeouts, this is a action that they run, and they've put a twist to it. So you have to be able to identify all of these scenarios. So here I've got loop entry, and then finally I got combo actions. So that's a combination of 2 or 3 actions together. So all of a sudden somebody runs this set, and it's got 2 or maybe 3 great situations that they run off, and you're trying to just draw the diagram and describe what they're doing. But really what they end up doing is they want to go into the post and get a hammer out of the weak side. And it's really confusing. They do some great stuff on it, but they run a punch into the post, eventually kick it out to a hammer. Maybe they go with DHO into it, dribble handoff into the situation. Maybe there's a flare action. All those things happen in one set, But if we've taught all those actions, we don't have to memorize the set. We just have to know that those actions are part of the set.
Coach, just one question on that. I'm a big believer in teaching all those things. When your team, when you're coaching, let's just say when you're coaching university, when you showed that in practice, you might see it 5 times a year, maybe 10 times a year. Were you prepping your players to defend it? We're going to defend it over the top if we ever see this, or are you going to change within your game plan team to team if you see, let's say, a Spain screen or however it is?
I would say this is how we defend it. Now, at halftime, or if I'm going to make an adjustment, then that is a tweak to one of our actions. It'll be a small tweak. But I have to believe that this is the way we're going to handle it because we've worked on it. And the reason why, and the guys know why we're doing it this way. So let's even talk simple stuff like a cross screen action. So on that cross screen, are we going over all the time? Or are we going under all the time? And if you stay consistent with it, and then a team comes up with you not only with a cross screen, but with a cross screen down screen, and it's a little bit of a twist of what they do, you're fine with it. Now, you might have a situation where you say, okay, we're going to blitz number 44, or on this ball screen action specific to that player, we are going to blitz that, or we're going to squeeze on that specific player. So those are small adjustments that you make, but you don't change your rule philosophy overall. You got to believe in it at the beginning. So when you put it in, you got to believe that this will work against real good offense.
Yeah, makes sense.
So when I'm implementing it and I'm looking at it here, the defensive inventory in a perfect world is taught preseason, pre-conference. It's taught in practice and then reviewed in your scout and talked about in your pregame. In a perfect world, you'd love to teach all of this before you start your season. And this is real tough and you can't. But you can teach what you're going to play against early just based on your scouting reports of what that team. Coaches tend to run things that they like. We don't change much. We may put a twist in, but we are who we are. So if you've played a guy for 7 years in a row, and they might be running the same thing, you're trying to prepare for it. But as you get deeper into the season, you've got more information to pull from. So the next one is, and this is one of the keys. If you want to teach defending actions, the first thing you must be is a great defensive transition team. You must be great at this. You must work on it every day, because what you're saying is, if my advantage is a half-court game, I've got to be so good at this that I can't turn the ball over, and I got to be so good at this that I can't give up to transition baskets. And if you looked at that scouting report that I put up there before, one of the stats that I put down is out of the 58 possessions outside of the ATOs that teams ran, how many times did they score in transition? And how many times did they just run random actions? But if you want to teach defending actions as a principle, as part of your defense and how you deal with half court, you must be exceptional in defensive transition and spend your time. And then you must teach and practice awareness. Put a score on the clock. Put a score on the clock. Put time on the clock. Put foul counts on the clock. Put bonus situations on the clock. Stop your practice and test your players. Are they aware? What's the score? How much time? What's the foul count? Do this in your end of game scrimmages or any time you scrimmage. Make your practice, teach awareness. And if you do that, you're really buying into the whole idea of the concept of how to teach and people understand it. Know your personnel. So going back to it, the concepts in that scouting report, I know the personnel and I know the guys who work together. And this goes back to what I said, certain ball screen combinations. Identification comes from visual repetitions. It comes from people talking. It comes from preparation. It comes from players on the court talking. It comes from the assistant coach on the bench, the guy sitting on the bench. Maybe your smartest scout reader doesn't play a minute, but he can consume a scout incredibly well And all of a sudden he turns around and he's yelling from the bench, watch cross screen, because he knows that their 2 down is a cross screen, because he remembered that from the screen, and he's helping you out, and all of a sudden he's giving you a cue. This must result in defense communication using your terminology. They call what they want to call, you must call what you want to call. So if I'm playing a player straight up, I might say certain, going left, he's a lefty. You know, max range, that's a term that I talked about and used a lot. The Onball Defender, in dealing with this, I always refer to the on-ball defender as a listener. His job, because all defense starts with pressure on the basketball, his job is to pressure the ball. Now, where the ball is on the court is going to determine how he's going to pressure it. Your philosophy is going to determine how he's going to pressure it. His ability to get into the player is going to determine how he's going to pressure it. His responsibility is to get on the ball, and I call the person on the ball the listener, because he's listening to the action. Ball screen left. All of a sudden now, somebody has helped him out. Step up. Now he hears it. That's a verbal communication that we have on our team. He knows what the step-up situation is. Back screen. He can't see a back screen. He's on the ball. So all of a sudden now, because the ball just got passed and somebody's going to set a back screen, we call it, and he knows that in our case there's going to be some form of switch. As he's on the ball, being the listener, the 4 other guys on the court must be talkers. They must be giving out player information. And this is terminology that you can create. You know, range, certain hand. You know, a great term I love was rhino. This is a guy who's going to be a charge, scoring ability. You know, dog. You know, are we doubling down from certain positions? Maybe defensively, we used to double down off and off the dog. And on the court, our players through our scouting report always had to know who the dog was, because we were coming off their worst shooter. And this meant that you had to know who their worst shooters were. And we had certain players that we would identify as potential dogs. So this was important, and that terminology. So the listener on the ball and the 4 people talking. Your players will have different aptitudes. No question about this. And these aptitudes, sometimes you're going to have to be able to help them. And often you're going to get, by having 4 people off the ball talking, this person may be the least, helpful of all the guys, but he's got to be part of it. And sometimes you're talking to him because you know as a player who's got the worst aptitude on the team. And so you've got to keep building it. But your players will have different aptitudes, so you'll have some strengths. But the nice thing about the defense is anybody with the strength of high aptitude can help on the floor or off the floor. If your opponent changes their approach, then treat it as a compliment. If you go into a game with a specific scouting report and saying, here's what they like to run, and all of a sudden they just said, we're going to squash everything and we're going to come up with this incredible 2-day offense. Great. You'll win. Because that 2-day offense they run, you've already defended those other actions too. But if they come out and they change everything, they change it because they know they couldn't beat you based on the information and how you prepare for them. And then the next part, and this is really important, is don't be married to the call. They call 2 down, they call elbow, they call punch fist, they call something, and our scouting report said they're going to do this. Well, okay, I'm thinking that, but all of a sudden now there's a back screen. I can't be married to that call. I've got to be able to read the action. And this comes to reading the action. So people are going to try to outthink you, be coy with you. And I understand that. Sometimes it's different languages. So that's why the action becomes so important, and identifying the action. And then when in doubt, just play the action. Like in your practice, there's going to be some random play. In a game, Sometimes I watch certain teams play and there's like 20%, 25% of random play. That's great. And you've got to do that at practice. But no matter what you do in your random play, it'll be an action that we've worked on. And this is a great way to identify actions. So when you're just doing something randomly on offense and we come and we practice on defense, this is a great time for you to judge your team's ability and aptitude on can they read these certain things. And any adjustments, like I said earlier, are straight tweaks to your rules. They are things that, you know, you can make, but don't, like, if you believe in something, then just teach it better than your opponent teaches it. And if they do something offensively and they just got more talent than you, and no matter how you do it, and might be a time where you tweak it a little bit. You know, you might send extra help. You might come up with do something a little bit differently. But these are adjustments that you make, but don't throw out everything that you worked all year to do.
Coach, a couple questions here. Oh, I'll let you finish this slide. We'll ask them after
Okay,
the slide.
sure.
Go ahead.
And then the last thing is, the last person who talks is in command. And reward players for talking. So if I say to you at the very end, and you don't want somebody who talks after the action, because there's a lot of those guys. You know, they just want to protect they want to just cover their ass. It's the one you got at the last person who talks. Switch. And you really didn't want to switch. And our scouting reports didn't call for a switch, but that person called switch. Then the last person who talks is in command. And the last thing is work and prep works. This is a lot of work. Trust me, that scouting report is detailed. It's tough. It is a lot of work, but work works and preparation works. And if you've ever been in a grade exam, and I know, you know, people talk and I would relate it back to school, it's when you put your head down and you get up and it's over and you know you killed it. You know you aced it. And as a coach, the best compliment you can get from your players is, you know, when they walk out of a game, sometimes they say, "Coach, man, we were ready. You know, we played well, but we were ready." And I think that's a compliment you can take as a coach. I'll take any questions, but this part here, like if I went further with this, and I'm not going to, as a coach in preparation, I always felt there was a battle between out of bounds, side out of bounds, baseline out of bounds plays, any out of bounds play. It was a battle that we as a team, I think, won over 90% of the time, because we spent so much time in prepping against teams baseline and sideline out of bounds. We spent more time than other teams. And then ultimately we felt we wanted to win that part of the game every game.
It's a huge part of the game as well. A lot of points add up there, right, Coach?
Yeah, absolutely. And you win those, that I think you've got a real good chance of winning close ones.
Okay, I'm going to throw a couple questions at you here. So we had a question early in your implementation. You talked about being great defensive transition team. Do you do that at the expense of offensive boards? Like, what's your trade-off on your defensive transition offensive boards?
Well, I'm watching a lot of NBA games now, and they're sending one to the board, two to the boards. And I think you can do both. I think you can send people to the board. You just have to be disciplined in your transition D, in how you teach it, how important it is to you. Like I've gone and talked to coaches, and they don't even have a set transition D. And you can send three to the boards. You know, I still thought of the great Celtic team that won it with Paul Pierce and, you know, that
KG
team.
and them.
KG. But the part of it was they sent Rondo to the boards, you know, which was very different at that time. They sent their point guard to the board, and Paul Pierce was always on a get back. And if you go back to those series in that team, Rondo was an incredible offensive rebounder because he could do that. So I think you can do both. I just think you have to spend a lot of time practicing it, and it has to be a focus of what your team does.
Awesome. Next question is, when you're teaching sets and how to defend sets, the awareness part, one of our guests wants to know, for U14, U16s, can you teach them that at that age? Being in grade 7, 8, 9, can you start teaching them some of those actions on your club team or provincial teams?
Yeah, I think I can teach a back screen. I think I can teach a cross screen. I'm not going to get a whole lot into a lot. I think I might only teach one way or two ways to handle ball screens. But if you take that group and you do what I just said, sit down. Like I was fortunate, my high school coach used to take me to games, and we would sit there and watch a university game together. And I never knew what the score was, because all I did was I just listened to him the whole entire game. He's got me watching players, watching actions, watching stuff. And if your team sees what you're trying to see, that will help them. But players, as much as video is a huge tool, players don't know how to use it as an advantage. And players like myself that weren't very good, we needed every advantage we could get. So I would bring that into, when I coached great athletes who were also very good at that, then they were very, very strong. So I think you can do it at a young age. I just think you just can't give them everything. But I think there's certain parts of that young age that you can teach them that you're going to see and make them better.
Okay, perfect. Now, another question is, obviously you showed us the NBA scout report, our national team scout report. With the younger ages, let's say high school and even like college, how do you keep from overdoing it is the one question. And then if you only had yourself as a coach, you didn't have assistant coaches, how much information and what information do you find most important if you had no staff to kind of go through it? Because you're obviously doing the scouting report, giving it to a coach, they're filtering it through, right?
So let's say you get on the board and you got 10 minutes with your guys before the game. As long as you put up their names, their numbers, just their numbers. And he's lefty, he's right, he's a big scorer, he's got big range, little things, just little highlights. You don't have to get crazy in depth. But you going on the court and not knowing the guy's a lefty, or knowing that the guy's a lefty before you step on the court, that's an advantage.
Yep.
If he like, how many times, like I talked about that high school story. We had a player in our team who was an absolutely incredible shooter. But if you looked at him and you didn't know anything about him back in high school, you would have said, man, I'm guarding that guy. And then he dropped 17 on you before you knew it. And then you said, ooh, made a bad choice. If I knew it ahead of time that he was such a scorer, we would have had a better chance at it.
Yeah, I agree. Any little bit helps, right? Especially when you don't know too much. Yeah.
All about advantage.
So a couple more questions. We're going to keep going with questions if you're okay with it.
Sure, absolutely.
So with more NBA offense being based around concepts, has it had much of an impact with advanced scouting because it's a little more concept-based play than A to B to C now?
Yeah, you know what? There's some teams in the NBA actually right now that don't use any advanced. Like I'm a regional advanced scout. I work out of Toronto and I work for a bunch of different teams coming in. Either I'm scouting the Raptors or I'm scouting against the team that's playing the Raptors. But I'm an advanced guy and all I do is a rolling call sheet and I forward that to the person who's going to drop the plays and do the video. Full-time scouts are doing rolling call sheets and they're doing the video and the fast draw and all that part, and analytics is doing the rest. But some NBA teams right now have no advanced scouting. They're doing everything off of video. And so in that, there are a lot of teams are getting back to the idea of the actions of handling it and playing lots of random. And teams that are very weak at transition defense, and there's not many in the NBA that are weak at it because they don't send many people to the boards. A lot of teams, if you're weak at it, you just send one person to the board and you get back. It's become a situation. But I found that there are a few teams now that don't even have live scouts at the games and just doing everything off of video.
Yeah, perfect. Another question, and this is from one of our viewers. This happened to me in university. So would you prep your bench squad to run the opponent's action? So when I was in university, our number 2 lineup always ran the Golden Bears stuff so that we could rep it. Or do you show it to your team as a whole, both sides rep it, defend it, play it as offense? Or how would you show that to your team?
Well, I think the first part is we show it in our scouting report. It's on the paper. We then put it on the video, and then we step out there and we'll have, maybe our second team run through it. Right. And so maybe our bottom 5 guys run through it, or managers. When I was in university, and one of the good things that happened to me was I got cut real early. And it told me that I had to find a way to play. I was a manager, and the coach at the time put me in charge of scouting reports. And I was like I would run the scout team, and the scout team was made up maybe number 14 and 15 on this team plus 3 managers. And we got to practice and play every day, and that was great. So as long as you walk through it, for those learners that can only learn through physically seeing it, that's where it's important. And you said Golden Bear, and all I can think about is cross screen, down screen, and
Yeah, that's it. That's the action right there. That's it. I joke about that. I can run that in my sleep. That's it. Another question here from the fans. How often do you do video with your teams? Let's say let's start professionally, then talk about university. Once a week, twice a week, right before the game.
Well, I in university, we did video before every opponent, and we did video at least once a week on ourselves. Like, I think if you have people on your staff, I think it's very important that you have a coach on your staff who scouts your own team all the time. That person has to know, so that that person can constantly build up video in scouting your own team. Because I think, you know, if you're doing everything, it's really tough. But if you can have a designated coach on your team, or one who scouts other teams, or one who just scouts your team, and they're making reads and calls, and that therefore you can make adjustments. Sometimes we get ourselves in conference so geared up with everything, we lose a little bit of sight of ourselves. If you can do that, I think that's really important.
Another question coming in. What's the youngest age you would use video for prepping?
I coached a grade 8 team in the World Children's Games, and we medaled. I did it 4 times, and we medaled 4 times and won 2 golds. And we were using video there, and not one kid that I coached had any idea of it. But I got them ready by showing them certain things at practice. I prepared them at practice, and then when they saw it, I think they became better at it. You just have to teach them that you have to watch and learn. Now, did it work for everybody? No. But did it give us an advantage? Yes.
Great stuff. Another one coming in here. Working at the pro level, did you guys at the pro level have a scout team, or did you, kind of similar question we just went through, do pro teams have scouts, or are you just walking through with your players?
No, they're walking through with players. They've only got a certain amount of people around with them. And now if you look at a lot of pro teams, you know, you look at some of the video coordinators in a lot of pro teams, a lot of 6'7", 6'8" video coordinators. There's a lot of 6'8", 6'7" therapists out there now. And the reason they're there is because you're using them on the scout team.
Right.
You know, you can do 2 things. If you're going to travel with us, I'm going to find a certain thing that you can do. Maybe just go out there and shoot with somebody, be a 6'7" body that one of our guys can practice against, or maybe bring you on the court and run a scout or something. So I think you can find that within your staff, within your managers, and within players on your team.
Yeah, makes sense why there's so many tall guys walking around there. Another couple coming in. We got a couple minutes left. Former player of yours, Titus, wants to know what you look for on a player on your team. That's a loaded question for you.
Well, he was probably one of the greatest players I ever coached. And what he had was a lot of dog, and somebody who loved the game. And he's a great example. We used to have a little game of me and him where I would say to him, you know, Ty, I think, and he's a Moser winner and athlete of the year in the country. And I'd say to him, I think, you know, I don't know if you can go left and pull up full speed. I just don't think you got it in you right now. And then I would say that, and then for 5 days he'd be in the gym working on it by himself. And then once he got to the point where he could do whatever I said he couldn't do, he would just kind of just quietly, Coach, you want to check this out? What do you think? And it was always like that. It was a challenge. And he had dog in him. He was a competitor, but he had internal challenge and took any advantage he could. In a scouting report, he was very good at reading scouting reports to see what guys did defensively. And he would watch teams, and he took advantage of our scouting report on what other teams did to make himself even better.
Those are special athletes when they go on their own to study the scouting reports to get those advantages, and that's ultimately what makes players and teams great.
Yeah, listen, I think most players like advantage.
Yeah, the more prep, the better. Now, Coach, a lot of people when we're going through that was asking for your PowerPoint. Do you have a contact email to put up? We're going to show this at a later date, so they're going to be able to see the slides. Do you have contact? Are you okay with people emailing us and us giving your email out?
You know what? You can contact me at Coach Raso on Twitter. You can contact me at jraso@cebl.ca. Any of those two, and I have no problem sharing. Like I said, look, Coach Carnesecca helped me out with one of my biggest scouting reports. And I think the one thing that sets basketball coaches apart from other coaches in other sports is that we share with each other. And we learn from each other like we're doing right here and we're doing with this clinic. So I have absolutely no problem with you sharing it or with somebody else sharing it. Not at all.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being on tonight from both Golden Ticket Sports and from Basketball Immersion. This was a lot of fun for me, especially to end the night with this one. This is great stuff.
If I can just leave one thing before I leave, because you said Basketball Immersion, and Chris Oliver was one of my assistant coaches, but first of all became one of my grad assistants. If I can suggest one thing to coaches, if you are an experienced coach, hire somebody who is young and wants to be a head coach, because that person will push you to think differently and challenge you. Chris was one of the first ones that ever did that with me. And if you are a young coach, then make sure you bring on somebody with a veteran experience that will mentor you and just, eventually every once in a while remind you to get back in your lane, because I think we complement each other. But I think I think any veteran coach needs to be challenged, needs to know how to do things a little bit differently. And if they challenge you and you can explain why, then you're learning. So, but Chris Oliver was my grad assistant, became an assistant coach with me, and has now done an absolutely great job. So I'm proud of him, and thank you for having me.